Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Zakiya Thomas, and tonight we're going to discuss what hangs in the balance for abortion access in this election year in Virginia. With me tonight are Torrey, Margie Castillo, National Director of Field and Advocacy for the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Justice, and Tarina Keene, Executive Director of NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia. Jesse, so if you can start us off, let's talk a little bit let's get some context regarding abortion access in the larger context. So if you could, can you tell us a little bit about the new law in Texas that bans abortion, Texas Law SB 8?
Absolutely. And thank you, Zakiya, for this opportunity. Again, I'm Torrey, and I'm the Managing Director for Whole Woman's Health Alliance. Whole Woman's Health Alliance is a nonprofit abortion provider and advocacy organization. We operate in Texas, Virginia, Indiana, and Minnesota. And so while I am here in Virginia and a Virginian, I oversee and am deeply connected to our work in Texas. And as many people have heard, SB 8 passed and was signed and went into effect on September 1st. And it is having devastating impacts on the ground in Texas. I will say what we are hearing right from our clinic staff. So there are 4 clinics in Texas, Whole Woman's Health clinics, one in McAllen, Texas, Fort Worth, McKinney, and then in Austin. And since the law has gone into effect, we've had to turn hundreds of patients away who can't be seen for abortion care because fetal cardiac activity is detected. And that is what the law did, right? It's a 6-week ban on abortion, which has been passed in other states and immediately blocked from going into effect. The thing that makes the Texas law different is the way that it is enforced. And it has this private civil action. And so the enforcement mechanism was taken away from the state and put in the hands of private individuals. And so this is the other really insidious piece of this legislation, which allows anyone in Texas or outside of Texas to sue anyone who quote unquote aids and abets an abortion. That includes abortion providers, clinic staff, loved ones, clergy members who may counsel people on the decision they make. We've heard in the news talk about people giving rides to people at clinics. So it really opens up neighbors spying on neighbors and gives anti-abortion organizations a lot of power to continue to do what they've always done, which is intimidate, harass, and perpetrate violence really on people who are getting abortions. Now, this law does not allow the people who are getting abortions to be sued, but it puts them in a really, really awful position of putting their loved ones, family members, and healthcare providers at risk. And so we've heard stories of people traveling out of state by themselves to get care because they are terrified of anybody in their circle getting sued. So that's just a little bit about the law itself. And I will say patients are stunned. They're devastated. They're really angry. They feel trapped. They are just in this very visceral, immediate way, right? They go in to get care. They're turned away, and then they have to contend with what it means to be able to get the care they need. And that often means going out of state to clinics that are already completely overwhelmed by the demand that's happening. And so I've heard in Oklahoma, in the nearest clinic, it's a 5-week wait currently to get an appointment. So this is it's a humanitarian crisis that's happening on the ground in Texas.
So what does that mean for women who have to go that far to get an abortion now, or who have to leave their state, or who are being turned away right now? What does that actually mean for them in their daily lives?
Well, so it means all number of things. And I think what we really understand, right, is in a situation like this, which is not surprising, those that are most impacted and most harmed are people who are the most marginalized in our community with the least amount of resources and access.
Who tend to be Black and brown women, especially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Black and brown women, poor people, people in rural areas. And so, and in our clinics, and I think across the nation, it's between 60 and 80% of people who come to get abortion care are already parents.
Right.
And so not only that they have to find time to take off work, to travel out of state, to find some place to stay, they often will have to find childcare. And all of these barriers, right, existed before SB 8 came into effect. And we're also still at play. There's a 24-hour waiting period in Texas. This law is on top of a whole host of other restrictions and invasions that have been on the books and in practice for many years, and that people are often already having to deal with to jump through these hoops. But this just increases kind of the bar that needs to be hurdled in order for people to access care.
Thank you, Jesse. Margie, I want to bring you into the conversation. Can you tell us a little bit more about what your organization does and how these kind of laws and how these kind of restrictions are impacting our communities?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks to everybody for this great conversation and important conversation. So at the Latina Institute, we are all about amplifying and centering the voices of Latinas and Latinx people across the country. We're fighting for health, dignity, and justice. And we're a reproductive justice organization. So that means that when we look at the issues of reproductive health care, we're thinking about all the different intersecting issues that may come up in a person's life in order to obtain the healthcare they need or to create the families that they may desire, right? So when we're talking about SB 8, it hits home for us even harder, right? Because we also deeply organize in 4 states, one of which is Texas, the others being Virginia, New York, and Florida. And so in Texas, we primarily organize in the Rio Grande Valley. And so to add a little bit more to what the previous conversation on barriers, when you think about undocumented immigrants, right, and then the folks that we work with in particular, when you're in the Rio Grande Valley, there are actual border patrol checkpoints surrounding the entire southern region of Texas. So when you think about folks who are undocumented trying to access care, it's literally impossible for them to leave their homes, right, to access care, especially if there's not a clinic within that region. So you can imagine what a law like SB 8 does. It effectively takes away their access to abortion care. So we're seeing, the added layer of being undocumented, right, and not having that access really being a pernicious effect of this law. So it's been really like Jesse mentioned, frightening, infuriating. And I think one of the key pieces I'm also seeing though is that there's hope. Folks are definitely eager to push back. There are mobilizations that are going to be happening on October 2nd. So just, next Saturday, there'll be over 600 marches across the country, one of which will be in Brownsville, Texas, where folks are going to get up and speak out against this, right? Rallying for abortion justice, rallying against these laws that try to take away our bodily autonomy. So, as much fear and anger as there is, there's also hope from people that ultimately know that this law is unconstitutional, right? Yeah. It's not right. It's against what most people believe. We also know that the majority of the country and states are with us on abortion access. Yeah. People want people who can get pregnant to have access to abortion. So
yeah, it's a very small minority that's pushing against it, right? The majority of Americans support abortion access.
That's right. So it's our turn to be vocal about that. So I'm really excited about October 2nd in particular.
And I know that on the national level, Jesse and Tarina, I'll bring you both back into this. So Jesse, on the national level, I know there's work being done your organization, Whole Woman's Health in particular, has put forth lawsuits to stop the Texas law because, there are other states around the country that are trying to implement similar laws. And one of the things I found the most interesting about SB 8 is that the precedent for it is actually the Fugitive Slave Law, the Fugitive Slave Act, right? So if you want to think about it, there's no good that comes out of having citizens sue over something like this. And we've seen it done in the past and it hasn't really worked. So can you tell us a little bit more about the legal side of this and the challenges that are put forth and what it means having a Supreme Court who doesn't seem interested in upholding abortion?
Yeah, I will. I will start out by saying it's incredibly complex, right? So one of the things about SB 8 that has really made things so different than in the past, where laws were easily be able to be blocked before going into effect and then challenged. The way that this law was written has created some additional hurdles and trying to figure out how to move that through the judicial system. And that's part of why there are several different challenges now, right? So whole woman's health, along with 27 other plaintiffs, abortion providers, abortion funds, individual plaintiffs, including clergy and clinic staff, filed the challenge that then ended up going to the Supreme Court and was not blocked in time for the law to go into effect. The Department of Justice has also sued the state of Texas.
I saw that. Yeah.
And I think there are, and now you've seen Dr. Alan Braid, who has violated the ban and has been subsequently sued. And so that may lead to another pathway of being able to challenge the law. I am not an attorney. I am an advocate for an abortion provider. And so we are also, along with our attorneys, learning from them how best to move forward and doing everything we can to challenge this law successfully and as quickly as possible, because it may not seem like a very long time since September 1st, but for people who are experiencing this in real life and are not being able to get the care they need, it's devastating. And so the impact every day is compounding. And so we have this urgency to continue to move forward. And we're really pleased to see that it's not just at the state level with the organizations, but the Department of Justice has gotten involved. And today in the House of Representatives, the Women's Health Protection Act was actually passed, which is quite monumental.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that really quickly?
Yeah, the Women's Health Protection Act, it basically codifies the right to abortion and it's been something that has been introduced and has been worked on by a whole gigantic coalition of advocates and organizations for many years. And so to see today come to fruition and really to understand that what we have to do is be proactive to protect access to abortion in the states. And this is in direct response to the inaction of the Supreme Court, right? And knowing that the pathway to have the Supreme Court follow precedent, we can no longer count on that in this day. And so it is up to the states and to our congressional representatives to really work toward protecting that right and really the access. It's more than just the right. It's also being able to actually access abortion.
It is. And Tarina, I'd like you to jump in right now and talk a little bit more about what that means in terms of what the legislation has to be passed, but also just in general, like, what does it mean for us? Like, how is that going to translate? And in the second half of our show, we're going to talk more about Virginia specifically, but let's talk about more what this means for the states across the nation. Like, how is this impacting the fact that the Supreme Court hasn't stopped this ban?
Well, for years, I know that I have been saying that reproductive freedom is a fragile liberty that we must vehemently protect. But right now, we're at its most fragile point since 1973. So what we're seeing with when the Supreme Court actually decided to let this law go into effect, it essentially has opened up the door to other states who might want to put forward copycat laws because the Supreme Court didn't really take the action that they should have taken, because we know that under Roe v. Wade, that this law, SB 8, is unconstitutional, blatantly unconstitutional. And so if we open up the door just a little bit, especially when it comes to the right to bodily autonomy, the right to be able to decide if, when, how, and with whom to expand or start a family, then that door just goes wide open for lots of different rights to be challenged. But in particular with abortion, we just know that this is something that has been high on the agenda for the most extreme side of the conservative movement, and that now they're about to get their wish. So Texas is just the beginning, and we know that the Supreme Court also has another case that it will be hearing on I think it's December 1st. They just came out earlier this week saying that they would hear a Supreme Court case, and that one is definitely something that in our movement has been preparing for the last few months, knowing that this is a direct challenge to Roe.
Yeah. So this is not only do we see through this that when it's a woman, our bodily autonomy is not necessarily thought of or cared for, but if it's any other right, it seems it's okay to we are allowed to do the things that we want to do. But if you're a woman, there's something about having a uterus, I guess, that tells people that it's okay to challenge me and to not let me do what I need to do. Sorry, not sorry. So I think it's important for us to keep in mind that this is something that goes against a particular portion of the population, a vulnerable portion of the population, and we have to do something about that. So Margie, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing in other states? Because as you mentioned, the Latina Institute works in other states as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the work that you're doing in other states, but also what that means and what you're seeing on the ground as a result of this?
Yeah, definitely. So, as Tarina just alluded to, right, none of this is a coincidence. This is a long-term, right, 40-plus-year strategy on the other side of this issue, and it's coordinated, right? Texas was the first step. We've got Mississippi coming up and their ban. There is already a copycat bill in Florida, so that's what our advocates in Florida are already seeing. That just, I believe, popped up this week as they have their committee week starting for their legislative session. And they knew it was coming, right? So some of the things that we're doing is sharing intel from what is happening in Texas to our colleagues in Florida. And we know that the entire southeast region of the state or the country is going to be impacted by this, right? That is literally the flow of what is going to happen. Louisiana's up, right? All of these states, these kind of copycat laws are going to flow through that. And just because that's the first layer of the attack doesn't mean that the rest of the country is free from this either, right? I think, Virginia, we have obviously an important election coming up that could sway which way we go on reproductive health rights and justice. So I think what we're really trying to do both at the state and national level is, build these broad coalitions, be in communication with each other, sharing intel, and knowing that it's going to take all of us, and not just reproductive health rights justice advocates, but really the whole progressive movement. We need everybody from labor to immigrant rights to LGBTQ rights. This needs to be an intersectional movement to beat back these attacks. Because as you mentioned, Zakiya, right, this is about controlling our bodily autonomy, right? They want to take bodily autonomy away from people who can get pregnant. That's the bottom line. They may make it about babies and everything else, their life, quote unquote, but at the end of the day, we know that it's about control and power. And so that's a fundamental fight that I think everybody should be invested in. A lot of folks, believe ultimately that where we land on abortion is at the core of so many social justice issues and fights, right? And so it's just really imperative that folks get involved now. And as advocates of this for a long time, right, we also know that when these moments pop up, it's the perfect time to get more and more people involved. There's a lens on our issue that hasn't been on for a while. There's a lot of new eyes here, and we just need to get people to the table and working together.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important for folks to remember that not only is it, we talked a little bit about this before, the access issue, but like, what does that, it actually means something to people. Like if I had, there were times, and we all remember this because it still happens, that just because I'm a Black woman, I wouldn't get the same rights and access as other people do. And that still happens. And let's not forget that, because your gender and your ethnicity and your race do have an impact on the quality of care you receive, but also on the access that you have to certain healthcare, financial resources, and the like. And this is just another barrier for folks who otherwise don't have the same kind of representation. And they're not. And so the folks who are in these positions in the legislatures don't really get that because they don't represent us. They're not following that. And so one of the things I do want to talk about is we have a midterm election next year, right? And we're going to talk about elections here in Virginia this year, but we have to start thinking about the folks who are running for office and what that means. So Tarina and Jesse, if you guys can talk about some of what's going on nationally in terms of what we're looking at and if there are any targets for folks who are abortion foes, like what voters should keep in mind going forward.
Right. Well, I can tell you just a few minutes ago, there was a vote in the House of Representatives, and which is the Women's Health Protection Act, which would basically codify the premise of Roe, the foundation of Roe it would codify bodily autonomy and the right to abortion. So that's an amazing vote that our Congress has just taken. It's something to celebrate because we've come a long way, but it's also we're not quite sure the outcome of the Senate just yet. But all these things take time. And our job as advocates is to continue to educate and inform the public, because we know that more than 7 in 10 Americans and also 7 in 10 Virginians actually support abortion. They support Roe. They do not want politicians telling them, interfering in their own personal, private healthcare decisions. And that's across the board, no matter what your political party is, or maybe even your personal philosophy on abortion. They definitely do not want that decision-making power taken away from them or interfered with. And that is something that is the foundational of our actual democracy, is being able to make these decisions and having bodily autonomy. But I think, as both Margie and Jesse spoke about, is that this is about power and control. I would also argue this is very much deeply rooted in racism as well, because you can tell that by who it really impacts.
Right.
I know Jesse was talking about how many people have had to leave Texas. I bet you, if we looked at the people who were able to actually get out of Texas and travel to another state to get this care, are probably look like me. And they have a lot more access to money and access to transportation. So I would say the vast majority of people who need care right now in Texas will not be able to get out in a timely manner to get the care that they need. So yes, elections matter, whether they're here in Virginia in 2021 or they're the midterm elections for Congress in 2022. I believe that this issue, having the spotlight on Texas, having the spotlight on the Supreme Court, is very much going to play very loudly in the next few election cycles.
Yeah. Jesse, do you have anything that you want to add to that conversation?
Yeah, I want to underscore, I think, the point that's already been made, right? That this issue is not something we can look at in isolation. So the fact that Texas passed the voter restriction bill that was passed this year as well, in addition to SB 8, these things are connected, right? And it does go to control and to really subjugating and suppressing the right and the ability of people to make their own decisions, to have their voice heard, to exercise their right to vote. The other piece that I just want to share from a provider perspective, we're talking about rights and also access. And the longer that this bill goes on, the likelihood of clinics shutting down in Texas becomes more and more real. And once a clinic shuts down, it becomes very difficult for them to reopen. So in 2013, when HB2 was passed and half of the clinics in Texas shut down, from 40 to 20 relatively, it has remained. So today there are about 20 clinics in Texas, and that is a huge state. And so the reality is even if we get SB 8 struck down, there is still an issue and a problem with access, right? For all the people that Tarina and Margie and I were all talking about that are most impacted, we still need to be able to build a system of care that allows people to actually get the care that they need. And we're a long way from there.
Especially, I would imagine, in the communities some of the communities we talked about. Margie, what's the access look like? What are you seeing now? Like, what is the state of access across the nation, but especially in the states that you're serving: Texas, Virginia, Florida, New York?
I mean, really in particular in Texas and Florida, you see folks averaging 2 to 3 hour drives to their most closest clinic. And so when you think about, especially our base of folks that typically tend to be lower income, working in the gig economy, working or unable to work because they need to stay home and take care of children because daycare is out of reach, right, in terms of financial. When you think about those folks, like, being able to take a day or two off to be able to access care may be impossible. They may not have paid sick leave, right? Like, if you're out there doing Instacart shopping, you don't get paid sick leave. So it may be hard to take the time off that you need to access the care. In addition to when states put barriers like mandatory ultrasound, mandatory waiting periods, right, that end up taking a procedure that may take a few hours to multiple days, right, for someone to be able to access the care they need. So it's really dire. And I think I want to speak on what Jesse brought up in terms of, like, knocking down SBA is not the only fight, right? Being able to create infrastructure and capacity for the people doing the work on the ground is super, super key. And if I could have an ask to any of the viewers that are watching this, is to help fund abortions in Texas. Give your money to abortion funds. Don't just think about the largest providers like Planned Parenthood, right? Think about the people and independent clinics and providers like Whole Women's Health Alliance and abortion funds who are funding the practical needs of abortion care, like hotels, gas money, et cetera. Because that's what we're going to need, essentially, right, to be able to give care.
Thank you, Margie. And we're going to take a quick break now, but stay with us and we'll come back and we'll talk about abortion care and access in Virginia in particular.
Freedom. It's at the core of who we are. The freedom to live without fear, to jog where we please, to wear a hoodie. The freedom to breathe. Before we celebrate the freedom most Americans have, we must fight for the freedom all Americans deserve. Because all lives can't matter until Black lives matter.
Dare to load their minds. Dare to explore. Dare to STEM. Learn more at She Can STEM.
Our fight against coronavirus isn't over. Let's wear face masks in public. Stay 6 feet or more from others. Follow state and local guidelines. And wash our hands frequently. Let's move forward together. Learn more at coronavirus.gov.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. Today we have with us Jesse Torrey, Margie Del Castillo, and Tarina Keene talking about abortion access. And now we're going to focus specifically on Virginia. So Tarina Keene, if I can bring you back in the conversation, can you talk to us a little bit about what's going on in Virginia in terms of the policy and the legislations that are being passed here in the state?
Absolutely. Well, I'm so excited over the last couple of years, some of the progress that we have made here in Virginia, and that is because we have a pro-choice majority, a pro-choice trifecta. In fact, we have a majority in our House of Delegates, the state Senate, and all three statewide offices, governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. And so during the 2020 and the 2021 legislative sessions, we've literally been able to roll back some of the most egregious laws that we've had on the books that really had barriers to access for a lot of people. We still have barriers, we still have some restrictions, but we were able to roll back some of the worst. And so that's opening up access to a lot of folks. And in the last segment, I know, I think Jesse mentioned that there are 20 abortion providers in the entire state of Texas right now. Well, here in Virginia, we have 16, which still isn't enough, but it kind of shows you how access is really an issue when it comes to this issue.
Hey,
But
Trina, if I can for a second, like when you talk about access, where are those clinics located? Like, are they all in the same place, or do we have them evenly distributed about the state?
I wish they were more evenly distributed, but they're mostly in our more urban hubs. I would say the most rural or close to a more rural area would be Roanoke in the Southwest, and I think there's 2 in Roanoke. We have 2 in Charlottesville, if I'm correct, and then you have to go to Richmond. I think there's 3 or 4 in Richmond now. Sorry if I'm getting my numbers wrong, but and then we have I think 3 in the Hampton Roads area and 3 in Northern Virginia.
So if
But
you're
we
in a
also,
large swaths of Virginia, you have no access. There are no
exactly. I
clinics.
mean,
Imagine
even
Texas, which is bigger. So yeah,
absolutely, and even for folks living in Northern Virginia, you still have to come into Falls Church or Alexandria, and other than that, you would have to go either to Charlottesville or Richmond. So
that's
it shows
crazy.
you there's this whole swath of Virginia that still you have to travel up to an hour and a half to sometimes 2 hours to actually get care. I will say though, as of 2020, we did repeal the 24-hour waiting period, the mandatory ultrasound that also had a 24-hour waiting period, which those also limited a lot of access to people, whether it was because of location or the drive, the time off of work, or the financial commitment that there is there. But so we have made some progress in Virginia. We still have a lot to do though.
So I was actually in Indiana last year working on a campaign, and Jesse, I was talking with the whole women's health clinic there, and we looking at what we have in Virginia versus what states like Indiana have, which are much more conservative legislatures right now. It's a whole world of difference. And to think that Virginia has only had this for, would you say, like 10 years that we've been working to get to this place, 10, 15 years? The progress that we've made has been astonishing, but it's nowhere near where we need to be. Yeah.
No,
So
that's right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Margie?
Yeah, no, I just, exactly to that point, right? What we were able to do with the Reproductive Health Protection Act was monumental. And we also know that it was a first step into really what the true meaning of reproductive justice and freedom is, right? Which is everybody, like every person in the Commonwealth being able to access the reproductive health care that they need. And so as a coalition, we've been thinking for many years now, even before the legislature was on our side, that what's it going to take, And so we started dreaming of at the Latina Institute a policy that we call the Reproductive Health Equity Act. And so that's really taking the next step after the Protection Act to think about how do we expand reproductive health care, including abortion care, but also lots of other forms of reproductive health care, like postpartum care, access to cancer screenings, right, for every Virginian. And in particular, this bill aims to expand coverage to undocumented Virginians and trans and gender nonconforming Virginians, which is really exciting. It's, I think when we introduced it in 2018, it was got pretty laughed at and pretty like, that's not going to happen. And I think probably people still feel that way now, but we're working towards it. We're building a really big coalition of support, including these folks on the call. And it's one of our priorities going into the 2022 legislative session. So it's a long game, but it's very exciting. And ultimately, we know, right, we can't rely on an infrastructure of funds and, donations to be able to access the care that folks need. We need to have, government funded money for this, right? We need to have resources for people to just access basic healthcare, which is what abortion is, which is what all forms of reproductive healthcare are. So it's really exciting. We have amazing champions in the legislature who are behind this, and we're working to educate more of our legislature on this important issue to make it a priority for passage.
And to that end, we have an election here in Virginia, right? So Tarina, you want to tell us a little bit about what's at stake here in Virginia and why it's so important for us to get folks and abortion supporters out to vote?
Absolutely. this is we every year we say this is a critical or pivotal election year. This is definitely a critical election year, especially for those of us who support reproductive freedom. And again, I can say this all day long. The vast majority of Virginians and Americans do support reproductive freedom, and so this is not just something that is coming out of the blue. It is reproductive freedom is something that everyone values and wants for themselves and for other people, and so that's what we're fighting for right now. And with what's happened in Texas, is we're definitely seeing a spotlight coming back on Virginia for this election year. We have a Republican candidate who is running for office by the name of Glenn Youngkin, who was caught on camera basically saying that he would love to roll back all of the advances that we have made for abortion access if he becomes governor, but he can't tell anybody that because he's got to get the independent vote. So you certainly don't want someone being your governor who isn't upfront with you about what they value and what their principles are, because we know what the real agenda is here from people who are opposed to reproductive freedom and justice across the board. The real agenda is to ban abortion and to criminalize providers and pregnant people. And we just can't have that happen. That is not the values that we all hold as Virginians or as Americans. So voting November 2nd is the last day you can vote, but right now we have early voting thanks to the new majority, the Democratic majority that we have in Richmond right now. So that was just passed a couple of years ago, a couple sessions ago. We can vote very early, and so my dad says to vote early and vote often, but you only get one vote. So use that wisely, looking at, especially if reproductive freedom and these progressive values are something that really you want protected and advanced in the coming years. We have to make sure that we protect the folks that are there now, and then we can also maybe even expand on that, because certainly if we don't win this election, we'll see those things rolled back. It's already been promised to us.
Yeah. And so it's not just the statewide elected officials that we're talking about. We're talking about our House of Delegates candidates as well. So it's very important. I mean, if you haven't already voted, go vote. Get your vote in the bank, right? Make sure it's counted, because you never know what will happen on election day. Have a plan and be ready to vote, because if you don't, then we could see the rollbacks that we don't necessarily want to see. Not just with reproductive freedom, across the board. So as we see in Texas, elections matter. Your vote counts. If your vote didn't count, then people wouldn't work so hard to try to take it away from you, right?
Well, we've also seen here in Virginia, some of these House of Delegate races decided by one vote or 10 votes or 20. I mean, just really real nail biters. So every vote, when I say you have your one vote, it does count, especially right now. And so make sure that you go out and vote.
And when we talk about voting, the reason why we want to talk that we're making sure that we have this conversation is because what happens in the General Assembly affects people in their daily lives. So Jesse, can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing here in your clinic in Virginia, and what access looks like in Virginia for the folks who come through your doors? You're muted, Jesse. There you go. Oh,
I just remuted myself. Okay, here we go. Yes, thank you. So I want to just harken back to what Margie talked about abortion funds, right? And so today, when patients come to our clinics, they are able to come, they can make an appointment, they can come in, they can get their abortion all in one day, right? That sounds like kind of revolutionary, but it's normal. It's how it should be.
Right.
And the Reproductive Health Protection Act allowed that to happen again here in Virginia. And that's how it should be everywhere. And really, people should be able to access that care in their own communities, right? We talk a lot about people traveling far and wide, and there's this way that it almost gets normalized, like that's something that is required for people who have abortion, and it is part of the stigma of abortion care, and it continues to add to it, right? That there's this expectation that you would get a lower level standard of care, you need to travel far, you need to jump through all these hoops, and that your insurance may or may not pay for it.
Right.
And so the thing that we still are seeing in our clinics, right, are people who struggle to be able to pay for the abortion care that they need. Abortion providers do everything they can to keep that cost to patients as low as possible and the quality of care as high as possible. But we have highly trained medical staff and physicians in our clinics providing that care. And so they it's a real cost. But when Medicaid and other insurance won't cover abortion care, people have to figure out how to pay for it themselves.
Right.
So that's where the system of abortion funds often comes in to help. And it's an incredible network across the country, right? There are abortion funds here in Virginia. They work in concert with abortion funds all over the country, including in Texas, that are working so hard now to do everything they can to make sure people have the funds to pay for their abortion, and also are able to pay for travel, lodging, other practical needs to be able to get that care. So that is something that we still see every day, and we work really hard to do all we can to advocate for the patients to make sure that the financial barriers aren't something that prevent them from being able to get the care that they need.
And one thing in particular that all of your organizations, Whole Woman Health, the Latina Institute, and NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia, you all have in common is changing stigma around abortion access and abortion care. Margie, I'll start with you, but if all of you want to jump in, like, what does that work look like? Why is changing that mindset and that culture so important?
Breaking down the stigma around abortion care and reproductive health care, right? Because it's really not even just abortion care. It's birth control. It's everything to do with our reproductive systems. Is slow work. It is, conversation by conversation. It's one-on-one. That's really the philosophy and our organizing model that we have at the Latina Institute. And so what that looks like is consistent contact with our community members, hosting house parties, meeting one-on-one, talking to folks on the phone, doing deep canvassing, phone banking, so many different tactics and strategies to have conversations with people where they are at on the issue, right? So we are never coming in saying you have to be pro-choice or you have to believe this or that or be on our side. It's really about listening to folks and also just doing education, because there's a lot of misinformation around abortion care, a lot of stereotypes in particular, right? One of the things that we face in the Latinx community is that we are supposedly all Catholic and none of us believe in abortion. And that's not true, right? When we know that 98% of Catholic women use birth control, right? So that's an actual statistic that's out there, and part of my lived reality, part of my family's lived reality. And so, we have to share that information, because another, trope that comes up, is in particular in our communities, is that we don't talk about reproductive health care. So just having the conversation is really what helps to break down the stigma, creating and, perfecting stories from our communities, right, of their lived experiences with abortion and with other reproductive health care is really important. So not just to share with legislators, right, but to draft op-eds, to talk to people in the media around what does it really look like to access reproductive health care in Virginia, anywhere across the country, because there's also a lot of just stigma and stereotypes and misinformation about all of that, right? So actually hearing from directly impacted people makes a big difference. But to get someone ready to share a story like that is a lot of work. So that's the work that our organizers do on our team, building trust with people, right? Getting people who want to do that ready for that, compensating them for their time, right, when they do share their stories. All of that leads little by little, brick by brick, right, breaking down that stigma around abortion.
That's amazing. And I know that kind of culture change takes a while. Jesse, you want to talk a little bit about the work that you all do in a similar vein? So in Tarina, I know NARAL does the same kind of work. It's so very important. Jesse?
Yeah, well, I would say, as abortion providers, I think one of the values that we have at Whole Women's Health is to stand in the light. And what that means, and pre-COVID, it meant a lot more open doors into our clinics, right? We've had to change things, but we are excited to bring people into the clinic to show them what it looks like, right? It is not a scary place. It's a gorgeous, beautiful place where people feel welcomed and accepted and honored for who they are. And just like Margie said, met where they're at, right? We don't expect everybody to come in with the same belief or attitude. Some people feel very resolved in their decision. Some people have more struggle. And we are there to meet them where they're at and offer them the care that they are choosing for themselves. I think the other piece is on a broader, wider level, is to really understand that abortion access and the whole spectrum of reproductive health care, access to that makes our community stronger and better. And that if we really think, like, abortion is not a dirty word, it's not something scary, but it is a moral and social good that helps us build stronger communities, because then people have the ability to determine the trajectory of their own lives, right? And so when that is reality, we have families that are thriving, communities that are strong, and people can feel safe and secure to be able to get the care that they need, and we're all healthier for it. So I think those kinds of messages and really talking about abortion in the affirmative, not shying away from it, I think is another way that we can all, in our own personal circles, really have those conversations to kind of change the way that narrative goes. I heard a statistic last night that anti-abortion folks say abortion 4 times more than people who are pro-choice, so-called pro-choice. And that has allowed them to control the narrative and maintain that stigma around abortion. So I think we reclaim this word and we understand it for what it is, that it is a component of the spectrum of healthcare that everybody has right to have access to, and that it is a good thing for our communities.
And for those who are interested, you do have a video on your website, Whole Women's Health Alliance website, or Whole Women's Health, that shows the clinic. So if anyone wants to take a look, I was personally, I love the Wonder Woman room and the Maya Angelou room and the Margaret Cho room. So those are fantastic. Tarina, tell us a little bit about the work you all do in terms of changing culture, changing mindsets, and stigma.
Absolutely. So I just want to also piggyback on what my colleagues are saying here, is that, 1 in 4 people who will have who are able to have to become pregnant. I'm sorry, I was not just all women. I was trying to it's women, but there are definitely other people who beyond women who have uteruses who can become pregnant. So 1 in 4 we know will have an abortion in their lifetime. And that means that every one of us knows somebody who has had an abortion or will have an abortion. And so with knowing that, and hopefully you have a trusted person that has told you about that, but maybe not, because of that shame and that stigma. I mean, I've had friends in my life. We've even had supporters of our organization. It took them a long time to tell me, and I'm thinking, I do this for, I'm an advocate. I'm very loud and proud and out there with it. But sometimes because of that shame and stigma, it has even pulled those people back, because they really want to know they can trust you with this knowledge. So what we're trying to do is, basically make it a safe space for folks to be able to share their stories, because as we've seen in other parts of our work in the world, within like the LGBTQ community, especially, as one part of this, is when you start telling stories, right? Then people know who you are, and they're like, oh, well, I do know somebody, right? And I love that person, or I want to make sure that they're supported. So that's one thing, that one of the ways that we want to do it is, if you have someone that you love, it could be, your daughter, your sister, your friend, your cousin, your niece, or whatever, that if they came to you and said, I've decided to have an abortion, how would you want them to be treated? Do you want them to be treated? Do you want them to go through a gauntlet of protesters outside of a healthcare center that provides abortion? Probably not. And so that it's all about bringing it to the personal, because the personal matters, especially when you know that there are a lot of the vast majority of folks who can have an abortion. They want this care. Somebody said to me at one point, like, "Oh, no one really wants to have an abortion." That is not true. When a person has decided that this is the care that they need and they want it, and they should not be shamed out of trying to access that care. They should have the access and the support to get that care when they need that care in a timely manner. And then just one more, it might have been alluded to earlier, so forgive me if I'm sharing the same statistic, but 6 in 10 women who have an abortion already have at least one child.
Right.
So this is not, there's this whole stereotype out there that it's teenagers who are having abortions, but that's just not true, really. Right. These are people who have made a decision about whether to expand their family, if it's the right time, for a multitude of reasons, and that is their personal right to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. That's where, again, that shame, taking away that shame and stigma and honoring people where they are instead of making it seem like they're doing something morally wrong.
Especially oh, sorry, go ahead, Jessie.
Oh, I was just going to add, I think, to everything that Tarina said, yes. And that this is often siloed as, quote unquote, a woman's issue, right? And we do talk about other people who can get pregnant and people with uteruses. But the reality is it's not just a woman's issue. It is a family issue. It is a men's issue, right? And so the other thing I think we can really do is be clear that abortion and access to abortion and access to reproductive health care is vital and important to all of us, to our families, our communities thriving, and encourage and invite men to participate, to speak up, to have those conversations in their own circles and networks of friends. Because the more that we're able to really talk about this as something that is normal, it should just be, though that is the way that we can change the narrative around what abortion is and isn't.
So in the last few minutes that we have together, I'd like for each of you to go through and just share in a minute or so how, what can we do? What can the folks watching our show do to help your organization and to help reproductive freedom as a whole? So Jessie, since you were the last one to speak, I'll let you go, and then Margie, and then Tarina. We'll end on you.
Well, I'm going to say the first thing is to keep talking about it, have conversations, register to vote, make sure everybody you know is registered to vote, and then exercise that right to vote, right? And I think right now, if you really want to do something to help support what's happening now, is supporting folks on the ground in Texas. And there is an Act Blue campaign that is a fundraiser. It's very easy to donate to. And it supports all 10 abortion funds on the ground in Texas. And so that really helps not only the people that are still able to get abortions in Texas, but all of those that they're trying to support to go outside of the state. And I would say in general, right, and here in Virginia, really supporting your state-based, your local organizations that are doing the organizing work on the ground, that are here, you know, my colleagues here, my counterparts that I work in coalition with, really joining and supporting organizations that are doing that work, mobilizing, is, I think, where you can really have the most impact and effect in making sure that we move forward in the way that we want to in this issue.
Thank you. Margie?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think what I will add, +1 to everything Jessie said, but also we're in a moment where folks are very galvanized to move, to take action, to do. And so we are, I mentioned earlier, right, there's going to be mobilizations on October 2nd. There's going to be over 600 marches happening across the country, thousands and thousands of people out there speaking about abortion access and justice from their lens, right, from wherever they are on the ground. And so I know there's a march in Richmond. There's going to be a large one in DC. All of these are taking very COVID safe precautions as well. So everyone who may be coming, like make sure to mask up, etc. But that's one way that you can come out. Again, donating to build infrastructure in states, right, and funding abortions is super, super important. And I'll plus one the conversations. Keep talking. Talk to your mom. Talk to your sibling, right? If you've never brought this up with them, bring it up today and just start breaking down some of that stigma.
Tarina, in about 30 seconds or so.
Okay. I will say the fight has been in the States and it will continue to be in the States. And you can tell from Texas to Virginia the different dynamics that we have, but it's all about right now getting out the vote and making sure that we have strong pro-choice champions who are making decisions at the legislative level, and that way they will help us change the policies that really do impact our lives in state. So and then also show up for the marches, vote, and then go march. But also volunteering is also a great way to get involved in our organizations and our movement. We need all hands on deck right now so that we can make sure that we protect reproductive freedom in Virginia and across this country.
Well, thank you all so very much for being with us today. We had Torrey, who's the Managing Director of Whole Women's Health Alliance, Margie del Castillo, who is the National Director of Field and Advocacy for the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Justice, and Tarina Keene, Executive Director of NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia. Thank you all so very much for your time tonight, and we've enjoyed speaking with you. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thanks for watching.